Welcome to Jewish Cinémathèque, where we meet some of the important faces involved with films that tackle aspects of the Jewish experience. Today I am joined by playwright and screenwriter Dan Gordon, whose film Irena's Vow premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival and is now in release across North America. The film stars Sophie Nélis, who you may remember as the young German girl in the 2013 feature film The Book Thief, and is directed by Quebecois filmmaker Louise Archambault. It is based on the true story of a 19-year-old Polish Catholic girl, Irena Gut-Updike, who managed to hide 12 Jews in the basement of a Nazi officer's house for over a year without his knowledge. She is one of the cherished few who have been honored by Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations.
Do you know how one survives this sort of change? Destiny.
From now on, you'll be working to contribute to the German war effort.
Your name?
Irena Gut.
You will be in charge of supervising the Jews. Your survival will depend on that.
I have until July 22nd to make sure that this entire sector is Jew-free.
We have no place to go. I saw a place where I can hide you, where no one would ever think of looking for you. In the house of one of the highest-ranking German officers in Tarnop. I made a vow then if I ever could save a life, I would.
But if anything goes wrong, we all pay the price.
Search everywhere! Everywhere, do you hear me?
I received a letter that I've been hiding Jews in my house!
Doesn't matter who we are. What we do is who we are. I think we should have faith. Because if we don't, something else will die inside of us too.
Dan Gordon has a filmography that is quite extensive. He has written for television and film, productions that include Highway to Heaven with Michael Landon, Wyatt Earp with Kevin Costner, Passenger 57 with Wesley Snipes, Hurricane with Denzel Washington, and Rambo: Last Blood with Sylvester Stallone. He has also written 7 novels, along with producing and directing for television and cinema. Gordon is a captain in the reserves, or actually a retired captain in the reserves, of the Israel Defense Forces. His play, Irena's Vow, that opened on Broadway in 1929 and starred Tova Feldshuh, became the basis for his adapted screenplay. Dan, welcome to Jewish Cinémathèque. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
My very great pleasure, thank you.
I actually saw the play on Broadway. It was terrific. Yeah. Tell me about the process. How did that play evolve? I mean, and then eventually, taking it so many years later into this new wonderful film.
I had heard Irene, as I knew her, or in the United States she was known as Irene, on a radio program in Los Angeles.
By chance?
Yeah. Was driving home. It was on Sunday night. Dennis Prager used to have a radio show at the time called Religion on the Line. And I was driving home and I heard Irene telling her story. And it was so captivating that I literally got to my home, parked in the driveway, and sat in the driveway for the next 2 hours listening to the radio show. And the next day I called the radio station and I said, "Hi, my name is Dan Gordon, and I'm not a psychopath. I'm actually a screenwriter," which are not mutually exclusive. But I said, I've got credits and everything, and here's my phone number. Could you pass it along to Mrs. Updike? And about 3 or 4 hours later, I get a call and I hear this lilting Polish accent that sounded like Zsa Zsa Gabor saying, "Hello, Hania, this is Irene." And that began the total love affair between Irene and myself. She was like a second mother to me. She was, so anyway, I got her rights and wanted to do it as a motion picture. It started its life as a motion picture.
And that's what you were not writing plays.
At that time, no. I mean, my original background was in theater, but I had long since left that background to actually make money. So I had a family to support, 3 kids to put through college. So made a deal with Alliance Atlantis, which was a Canadian company at the time. Movie never got made. I've been in the business now for 57 years. This is in May is my 57th year as a professional writer. And the only time I've ever bought back a screenplay from a studio was Irene's story. And I was just determined to make the thing. And she kept on saying, she used to, at the end of her life, she spent the last years of her life going to schools, most of the time inner city schools, and telling her story. And she would always put the responsibility on the kids. She would never say, "I'm the last generation." She would say, "You're the last generation that will ever hear from a living witness. You have a responsibility."
Wow.
And she spoke to these kids who had no notion of the Holocaust, Jews, Poles, nothing. I mean, these were inner city kids who couldn't have cared less. And she had them in the palm of her hand. And at the end, she used to say, "Even the big macho boys come up for a hug and a kiss from Irene." And it was true. So anyway, the hardest kind of a movie to get made is a Holocaust picture. And I tried and tried and tried. It was same very close numbers of times. Couldn't get it done. And then in the early 2000s, I started writing theater again. And I had had a couple plays produced, and I thought, I sort of know this game a little bit. And I hooked up with a wonderful couple of guys here in New York. Saw one of them last night, John Stanisi and Tom Ryan, give them a shout out, who had a theater company called Invictus Theater. They were both actors, wonderful actors. And I had done a stage adaptation of my movie Murder in the First with them. First as an off-Broadway, and then we did it off-Broadway, and probably the best reviews of my life in the theater were for that play. And one night here in New York when we were doing Murder in the First, I said, "You know what? I'm going to tell you guys the best story you ever heard in your life." And I told them the story of Irena's Vow. And they said, "It's the best story we ever heard in our life. When can we read it?" I said, "As soon as I finish writing it," because I hadn't started writing it yet. And I wrote it as a play very quickly, got it to them. And if you ever talk about a lost cause, I believe we had 14 actors in the cast, which is so stupid in theater today to do a play with 14 actors. That's an original play. Sure, nobody wants to put up that guy. It's 4 actors max. And we found a wonderful angel, a guy named Stan Rafe of blessed memory, who put us up off-Broadway. We ran for, I think, 4 or 5 months off-Broadway, never had one seat that wasn't sold out. In fact, my favorite story was one night I was there with the producer, Stan Rafe, and somebody was sitting at my seat. I said, "Stan." He said, "The best thing, kid, is to have a show where you can't even find a seat for yourself. We'll stand." We did. And then Daryl Roth and the Nederlanders came in and backed the piece for Broadway, and we transferred from the Baruch College Theater to the Walter Kerr Theater.
On Broadway.
And on Broadway, and we ran, I think, 3-4 months on Broadway. It was nominated for Best Play by the Outer Circle Critics Awards. And then I met 2 wonderful guys.
Dan, you're a terrific storyteller. Does one have to be a terrific storyteller to sell a screenplay?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, let me let you continue. This
Absolutely.
is fascinating.
Yeah, you sell it by pitching it. People don't read without having heard the pitch, and basically made up their mind on the pitch. Then if you can deliver what you pitched, you've got a deal. But if you're, unless it's a development deal, if you're trying to get something made, you have to be able to pitch. So Jeff Sackman, Barry Meyerowitz, two Canadian guys, fell in love with the piece, and they did heroic work to get this thing made. The Polish Cultural Institute supported the play, and they also supported the film. The Polish government did as well. And it took them 7 years to put the pieces together. It was a very hard movie to get made, but they did. And the whole reason behind it was, as Irene was really towards the end of her life, she said, "But who will tell the children when I'm gone?" And I said, "You will. And we're going to get it as a play, and then we'll get it as a movie." She was literally in the hospital dying, and I had workshopped the play. It hadn't yet been put on anywhere. It was at a small college in New England. And I called her daughter, who was at her bedside, as the audience was giving it a standing ovation.
Wow.
And I said, "You hear that, Irene? That's for you." And she passed away the next day.
What a story.
Yeah,
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, so it was, originally it was sold to a Canadian company, you bought it back, and now your parents were Canadian. I mean, not Canadian born, and were you also a Canadian citizen? Did that help
I have
sell
Canadian, yeah, I have Canadian citizenship, and that was part of the deal, that they could brand it as Canadian content, because I have
a Canadian director and Canadian actor?
Well, Canadian writer, director, actor. So you had all the, you know, for a telefilm set, you have a point system. Right. So it got the maximum number of points you can get in terms of Canadian content. And absent that, we wouldn't have been able to make the movie.
And now we're going to look at a clip from Irena's Vow.
Irena, bring it.
I have seen things, Herschel. Terrible things, horrible things.
Don't tell me. I don't want to know. And if you know what's good for you, you'll forget everything you've seen. Now, pull yourself together and go out there and serve dessert.
But I...
I don't want to know. You're going to serve dessert now, Irena. Do you understand me? You're going to serve dessert, and you're going to remember what I told you about your survival here. Because sometimes survival means serving dessert.
And when the film was shown at the Toronto International Film Festival, I fortunately was there.
Yeah. I wasn't, unfortunately, so I don't
You
know.
were not there, but
Yeah.
everyone,
Yeah.
where's Dan?
Yeah.
But there was, if I remember correctly, there was like a 6 to 7 minute standing ovation
Really?
for a Holocaust film. So people don't,
Wow.
people are like, you know, the film's over and they're speechless.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, everyone in that
Wow.
audience just stood up. Standing ovation.
Yeah.
It was something.
Well, I'll tell you, you know, when we were both off Broadway and on Broadway, we never had a night where we didn't have at least a 3-minute standing ovation, and sometimes it would go 7, 8 minutes. It was extraordinary. I mean, her story moves people in such a profound way, because you almost can't believe that someone is that good and would risk so much.
And boy, did she risk.
Yeah, simply because it was the right thing to do. That was it with her. People would say, well, what way? She had a tremendous faith. She was very religious, but not in a dogmatic way. But she had a profound belief in God. And she just felt that God was not going to let any harm come to them. And she also had an extraordinary sense of humor. And she many times said, you know, if it wasn't the fact that we could have all been killed at any moment, we'd have been laughing the whole time. Because she said it was like a French farce. One door slams shut, the other one opens. they beat death so many times by such absurd things, and she came up with these things. She was, I won't say she was an extraordinarily talented liar, but she was an extraordinarily talented improviser on the truth.
And you use that so well. I mean, it's in certain respects, and it's a thriller, but it's also a film where you just want to, hug her at various points in time. Dan, you've had an amazing career. You picked yourself up. You left home at a young age. You went to LA to write, to go to school at UCLA. And then at a certain moment, you moved to Israel. I think you lived in what, Kibbutz
Ginegar. Yeah.
Right? And so how did this screenwriting dream of yours evolve? You were this young kid living on a kibbutz, probably having to go out and pick sugar beets.
Did that. Picked most things that grew, and a few that didn't. I left home at 16. With the active encouragement of my parents,
meaning that they wanted you.
They wanted me out. My father and I had a very stormy relationship, and my father was a good man, but he and I butted heads a lot, and it was not his fault. My father was born. He married very late in life. He was born in 1895. He was 52 when I was born, so he had 2 American teenagers. And he was born in a shtetl in Russia. And he said to me once, my father whacked me around, but that was how you did it, And he said, when my father used to beat me with a belt, I would have to kiss his hand and pray to God to give him the strength to beat me again.
Oh, wow.
And I said, you'll never get that from me. And that just destroyed him,
What was your first language?
English. My parents didn't speak Yiddish at home or anything.
Oh, they did.
That was the secret language. They spoke it amongst themselves.
Okay.
So anyway, left at 16, went to Israel, to Kibbutz Ginegar, and I became me there. Honestly, that's where I can really say that's where I became who I am, for better or for worse. And I had a spectacular literature teacher named Shlomo Carniel, of blessed memory, who was a Holocaust survivor, who was 8 years old when he was in the Warsaw Ghetto, 8 years old when he was in Auschwitz. He and his brother escaped from Auschwitz, hooked up with Polish partisans, came at the end of World War II to Israel. He was an alcoholic. He used to come into class hungover, light up a cigarette, right in high school, sit there like this with his head in his hands, and you just see this cigarette coming out. And kibbutz kids are wild animals. They're not housebroken. We were the worst. The worst. We actually drove one teacher out under a barrage of fruit. And the poor man left broken, and everyone would wait until Shlomo lifted his head and he would start to speak barely above a whisper, and you'd be like this. So in the beginning, by the time I started school, I was conversant in Hebrew, but I couldn't write worth a damn in Hebrew. He was bilingual or tri or quadruple lingual, and he said, you can write your compositions in English. So I wrote a couple compositions for him in English until I became more comfortable in Hebrew. And one day he said, I want to come out to your kibbutz on Shabbat, I want to talk to you. And I thought, oh, that's it, I'm being thrown out of school. They're kicking me out, which would have been a big deal because I was all alone in Israel. I didn't have any parents or anything. And if I get kicked out of school, next thing they're going to kick me off the kibbutz. So I was really scared because that was a big deal. This is 1963. To come out to my kibbutz from his, he actually had to sign on for a car because the buses didn't run on Shabbat, and it was a big deal. So he came out. We took a walk up in the forest above our kibbutz. He's not saying a word. I'm dying. And he said, I have what I think is terrible news for you. And I thought, that's it. I've been expelled. He said, I think you're a writer. He said, and I don't know what you want to do about that. If I were you, I would run from it. But if you don't want to run, I can help you. And presumptuous to say I had waited my whole life because I was only 16, but I had waited my whole life to hear someone say that. And he said, you're not ready to write. If you start writing now, you're just going to develop bad habits. Don't come to class anymore. I'm going to give you a list of books to read. Go to the library. We'll meet once a week, and all we're going to do is talk. We're just going to talk about what you read. And he was the greatest mentor of my life. And I owe him my career. I owe him, I think, my life. He was the greatest teacher, greatest mentor I ever had.
What a story, and what a terrific mentor.
Yeah. I almost married his daughter in order to become his son-in-law.
Wow.
She was a nice girl, but I wasn't in love with her. But honestly, I was like, you know, whatever it takes, I want to be a son-in-law.
It's interesting, later in life you helped found a school, a film school, with a very specific curriculum. Do you think your experience as a youngster impacted that?
No.
No, because
it was my son's, also a blessed memory. The last conversation I had with my son Zachy of any length was here in New York. I was doing Hurricane, and he was 22 years old. He had just graduated, may I say, first in his class from Tisch School in the Arts. And I said, when are you going to come back to LA? Because he'd already done his first feature when he was 20. He was a published author at 19. I said, when are you coming back to LA? There's no door I can't open for you. None. I knew every studio head from when they were somebody's assistant. I mean, I've been in this business
You've
a long
been around
time.
for a while.
I said, so when are you coming back? I can open any door you want. He said, that's why I'm staying in New York. He was not going to piggyback on my reputation. He was going to do it totally on his own. So he was working as a production assistant on an HBO movie called Studio 54. And our offices were equidistant from, I forget what steakhouse. It was a good steakhouse. And we'd meet every evening around 11:30 at night, midnight, have a couple steaks, bottle of wine. And I wasn't so stupid that I didn't know that this was as good as life gets. You're with I have 3 sons. The only one who was going into my profession was Zachy. We had a secret language that the other 2 boys, as much as I love them, we don't share. And he said, Abba, I made up a film school. And I said, English is my first language, and I don't understand that sentence.
I made up a film school.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I said, what is it? He said, yeah, they teach film, you know. He had learned in Columbia and at Tisch. He said, they teach it the way they did in the Stone Age when you were at UCLA. They haven't changed any. He said, I came up with a whole different way of teaching film. And he had thought it out, what equipment, how many teachers, the whole thing. And I said, this is spectacular idea. What are you going to do with it? He said, I just gave it to you. I said, what am I going to do with it? He said, I have no idea. And 2 weeks later, he was killed in a car accident. And by quote unquote chance, 6 months after that, I was on a plane going to Calgary to my cousin's kid's wedding. Your family originally came from Alberta? My dad's family was all they were all drunken Canadian cowboys. They were, put a pin in that. I actually told Mel Brooks this story when I was on the lot at 20th Century Fox. Cowboy work is the worst work in the entire world.
That's a great screenplay for you.
Yeah, it is. I tried to get it made a number of times.
Okay.
All these cowboys were immigrants, and a lot of them were Jews. So these were Yiddish-speaking cowboys. And there were a number of Blackfoot Indians who worked on the ranch as well. And nobody spoke English. The Blackfoot didn't speak English. So some of the Jews learned Blackfoot, and some of the Blackfoot learned Yiddish. And we used to go up every summer to Canada to my uncle's ranch. My Uncle Hyman in Pincher Creek, and he had a bunch of ranches, Clarendale. He was a big-time cattle rancher. And there was this time where he said, Daniel, which is, you know, in Yiddish is Daniel. He said, you want to go and see the Indians? He said, I have very good friends from the Schwarze Visselach, right, the Blackfeet, which I thought was the actual name of the tribe. I was 8 years old. So we go out, we ride onto the reservation, and it was like a scene out of Dances with Wolves. You got to understand, this is like 1953, maybe, 54. Teepees, skins drying on racks, little kids jumping through the fires and stuff. And this one older Native American steps out have the teepees, got the Willie Nelson headband and the braids and the whole, the full kit. And my Uncle Hyman spoke Blackfoot, and he shoots him a little Blackfoot, and this old Indian says, "Was machst du, Hyman? Das ist der kleine Ruia, schöne Bucher." So,
straight out of Blazing Saddles.
I said to Mel Brooks, I said, "Mr. Brooks, I have to tell you, when I saw Blazing Saddles, I thought it was a documentary." So,
we could. You're an amazing storyteller. We can go on and on and on. I just want to, just jump ahead,
Sure.
and in fact, that idea for a film school became a film school in Sedona and eventually at Liberty University.
yes, today
it's the Zaki.
Today it's called the Zaki Gordon Cinematic Arts Center. At Liberty University, we have almost 280, I believe, film majors, maybe 300 minors, 800 kids taking classes of various kinds, and we turn out people who know how to make movies. And it's a wonderful school. We're now in our 11th year, I think, 12th, maybe the 12th. No, I take that back. We're in going to be in our 14th year in September.
So when he told you, let's make a film school, you and Zaki made that film school.
Yeah.
That's quite a tribute.
Zaki made the film school. I just was the messenger.
You have had an amazing career in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And now, all of a sudden, you're making a Jewish Holocaust film.
Yeah.
Many writers are concerned about, oh, that guy just writes Jewish films, or that guy just writes Holocaust films. Was that a concern of yours? And
Never.
do you see on the horizon other, maybe the Jewish Cowboys of Alberta, other stories with the Jewish flair?
I'll tell you, long time ago, I went to Bill Shatner, who's a Canadian Jew.
From Montreal?
Yeah, and then grew up in Toronto afterwards. And I said, "This is my dad's story. I'd love you to play my father." Wow. And he loved the idea, and I tried to market it and shop it around, and Blazing Saddles literally killed it. People would said, it's too close. I said, it's not close. It's my father's story. But yeah, I'd love to do that. I mean, I'm not, I've had a really blessed career where I've done westerns, I've done thrillers, I've done spy movies, I've done everything except slashers, which I don't do.
You've written, you've directed, you've produced.
Yeah.
You're now working on a documentary about October 7th
Yeah.
with the Trinity Broadcast Network. Can
Yes,
you
sir.
just tell us a little bit of what you're doing?
Yeah, I will, I will, and I say this honestly. This is the motivation behind it, and I say this honestly with nothing but love. There's a surplus of hatred and intolerance right now. So I'm honest and true, say this with nothing but love. But to the Jonathan Glazers of the world, who is a filmmaker I respect, and to the Tony Kushners of the world, who I think has written a couple of spectacularly gifted screenplays. Hamas's invasion of Israel and its subsequent massacre of Jews had no more to do with occupation than Hitler's invasion of Europe and massacre of the Jews had to do with Lebensraum. Both of those truly demonic ideologies have a natural nexus, a meeting point, which is a fanatical and fascistic hatred of the Jewish people. That is what ought to be refuted by people of conscience everywhere before anything else is said. You can then say all kinds of other things, and there are things to be said. But the first thing you have to refute is that. And honestly, I don't want to get in a political discussion, but there was no occupation of Gaza for a long time ago. Since 2005, they could have turned the place into Dubai. And unlike people who belabor under the burden of knowledge of social media and nothing else, I've fought in Gaza. I've been in Gaza. I just got back from Gaza.
You served in the Israeli army for over 4 decades.
45 years. So I know a little bit about the situation there, and I also was involved in the peace process for 40 years. I mean, I met with President Mubarak, King Fahd, King Hussein of blessed memory, all the factions of the PLO, the PFLP, and the Democratic Front for Liberation of Palestine when it was illegal for any Israeli to talk to them. And I was the fig leaf, because they could say, you're not meeting with an Israeli, you're meeting with an American. Right. So I know a little bit about it, and my heart is committed to peace there. But the notion that occupation had something to do with what Hamas did is insane. It had nothing to do with it.
So this documentary is going to tell the truth.
It deals with the events of October 7th. I went to Trinity Broadcasting Service, which is the network, which is the largest Christian broadcaster in the world, reaches 100 million households. And thank God for Matthew Crouch, who's the head of TBN. I said, here's what I want to do. I need 4 hours, which is unprecedented, 4 hours to do a documentary series about October 7th. And then I wound up giving him 7 hours. And it's all going to be, we've broadcast the first special already, and they'll be played out along the way. And I advise people to check out TBN to see when it starts. But it's an in-depth look at what happened October 7th and the aftermath.
Are you writing it and directing?
I wrote it, I directed it. I'm the on-camera host, for better or for worse. And the documentary, you know, when you pitch something, you have to make it as easy as possible for people to grasp. So I said it's really 4 H's. Episode 1 is the horror of what happened. Episode 2 is the heroism, because Hamas didn't stop because they filled their quota and said, oh, we've killed 1,200, let's go home. They stopped because the citizens of Israel stopped them. It was individual soldiers, police, paramedics, people protecting their families, grandparents protecting their grandchildren. It was a total failure of the Israeli military and intelligence establishment, and the people of Israel stepped up and they saved the state of Israel. And they bought the army enough time to regroup and come back to who the army was. So first hour is the horror, the second hour is the heroism, the third hour is called Hysteria, Hatred, and History, and it deals with the rise of Jew hatred worldwide in the wake of October 7th. And the fourth hour is called The Hope, because within this whole thing there is, I believe, a glimmer of hope if everybody does the right thing and takes advantage of the opportunities that are going to be out there. So it's a really interesting 4 hours that I urge people to see.
What a great way to end. I mean, Irena's story is also a story of hope about good.
You know, I know that if Irene were with us today, and I feel like she is, she would be the first one to say, this isn't the time to be quiet, it's the time to speak. It's not the time to keep your head down, it's the time to stand up. It is not the time to be timid, it's the time to be brave. And to say Jew hatred in all its forms cannot be tolerated. It's a cancer. It always starts with us. It never ends with us. It never ends with us. And you know, the joy of the movie of Irena's Vow is, even though it is a Holocaust movie, it is a story of so much hope. It is a celebration of what goodness and courage can accomplish in the face of evil, and what faith, real faith, can accomplish. I mean, I'll tell you one tiny anecdote. Irene hid 12 Jews, unbelievably, in the house of a German major without his knowledge. When he found out, and he was up in years, he was in his mid-60s, and she was a beautiful young 20-year-old girl. She was forced to become his mistress in order to save the Jews, and she did. She went to a Catholic priest, she was a devout Catholic, and she confessed, and she wanted to get absolution. And the priest said to her, you can't do that, what you're doing is immoral, you have to stop doing that. And she said, if I do, they'll all be killed. He said, it doesn't matter, your soul is at stake. And Irene said, oh, got it. Thank you very much. And she walked out. And she said, you know what? I don't need anybody in between God and me. God and I are fine. God knows what I'm doing. I have faith in God. And that's the way she lived her life from then on. And it's such a pure faith, and she had such an innate love for the Jewish people. Truly inspiring, truly inspiring.
The film is Irena's Vow. It's a film that is a must, powerful, moving, and you walk out feeling really good. Dan, thanks so much.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure to meet you. I'm a fan of your show and to be on the show.
Pleasure for me too.
Thank you.